Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the exciting March 2009 meeting of the Santa Barbara Creeks Advisory Committee. We're going to call the meeting to order and ask Liz to call the roll to ensure that a quorum is present.
Chair Moldaver?
Here.
Mr. Jordan?
Present.
Mr. Schluter is not here. Mr. Weber? Here. Mr. Wilson? Here. Mr. Hockman?
Here.
And Ms. Falcone and Mr. Jostes are not here.
Could you amend that to indicate that Mr. Schluter is here?
Mr. Schluter has just arrived.
Thank you. That covers item number 2. It brings us to item number 3, approval of the draft minutes of the January 14th, 2009 meeting. Daniel? Okay.
Thanks, Chair. Just a minor correction in the public comment. It lists the city of Goleta, and it's actually the Goleta Water District. That's it. Thanks.
Is that part of your motion to accept the amended draft minutes?
No, Chair. I was making a recommendation for the amending of the minutes.
Okay. Are there any other corrections or amendments? Or is there a motion to accept the draft minutes as corrected?
As amended.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right. It's been moved and seconded to accept the January minutes as corrected. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? Are there any abstentions? All right. The minutes are accepted as corrected. Mr. Benson, are there any adjustments to the published agenda? That brings us to item 5, public comment. Under the Ralph M. Brown Act, any member of the public who wishes to raise any issue with the Creeks Advisory Committee that's within our purview but is not listed on the agenda may fill out a slip and come forward and share your thoughts for 2 or more minutes. Are there any people in the audience who wish to do that? All right. Seeing none. The comment from the committee.
Thank you, Chair. As somewhat of a public large representative, seeing as how there's not a resounding number of public out there, if anyone's listening and they really do wish to communicate with the Creeks Committee, please come in and speak with us directly. We'd love to meet you, or contact city staff through the sbcreeks.com website. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
Very good point. Anything else on item number 5, public comment, which could include comments not related to the agenda from members of the committee? All right, that would bring us up to item number 6, committee member and staff communications. Why don't we start with Mr. Benson? Are there any communications or activities since our January meeting?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a couple of things that I wanted to mention to the committee, really regarding the committee membership. First of all, I had a conversation with Matt O'Brien, who is our newest committee member, regarding his concern about potential conflicts of interest from him serving on this committee and his employer, which sometimes bids on city contracts. And he had concerns about the potential for an actual conflict of interest or even the appearance of a conflict of interest from his service on this committee. Initially, he and I met and we discussed the potential for conflict of interest. We thought we could resolve any potential conflict by having him recuse himself from participation in not only any vote, but any kind of process that would involve a contract that might involve his employer. And we thought that that would be sufficient. But then on further review and after talking with the city attorney's office, Mr. O'Brien felt that it would be better to be safe than sorry, and decided to resign from the committee before any kind of conflict arose. So there wasn't anything in particular, but he was concerned that that there could be down the road, and wanted to prevent that from happening. So I received a resignation letter from Mr. O'Brien in January, and that's why he's not here tonight. And when I bring that up, I also want to point out that recruitment for this committee, the city has two separate official recruitment periods for all of the advisory committees and commissions in the city. The next recruitment period will begin at the end of April, and there will be interviews and appointments in June. But the city clerk's office will always accept applications. So if there's someone who is interested in serving on the committee, you can submit an application anytime, and then that application will be valid for the next recruitment period. You still have to come in and do the interview with city council, but people could submit an application at any time. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, speaking of resignations, is I should also announce that Daniel Hockman, who you all know, has also submitted his resignation as a full-fledged or voting member of the committee. And he did that because, as you all know, he was appointed in December to serve on the Park and Recreation Commission. And the city's rules require that he not serve on this committee at the same time he's serving on the Park and Recreation Commission. So as a result of that, he was forced to resign his position as a voting member on the committee. And although the Park Commission has appointed him as the new Park and Recreation Commission liaison to this committee, which they did at his request, I wanted to take an opportunity tonight to recognize Daniel for his hard work and his commitment to this committee. You all probably know that Daniel was an early supporter of Measure B. He's a charter member of this committee. He's been on the committee as long as it's existed. On a personal note, I've had an opportunity to work with Daniel as a colleague, when I was a member of this committee. I think I was even fortunate enough to nominate him to be chair of the committee at one time, and also to work with him as staff for the Creeks Division and for the committee. And I just can't say enough about him. He's generously contributed his time and his talent and his energy, his insights. He's been very, very involved in the program. He's always constructive. He's been vital to this program's success over the last 8 years, and I think his volunteering to serve as a liaison from the Park Commission and continue to come to these meetings just reflects his ongoing commitment to this program. And so we have a little something for you, Daniel. And on behalf of the city and the Parks and Recreation Department and the Creeks Division, I wanted to present you with this plaque, a certificate of appreciation for all of your hard work and your dedication. And on here we have a photograph of before and after on the Arroyo Burro Estuary Restoration Project.
That's
so
wonderful.
Thank you.
That's great. Wow. Thank you. That's this is wonderful. I just feel very honored to be able to sit here and to listen to those kind words. It has been an interesting journey from before Measure B to the inception of the Creeks Committee to now coming back to the committee as a liaison. It was very, we've had our first vote on minutes, and it was odd to not be able to vote. But I will hope to continue to be constructive and perform my duties well, and represent the Park and Recreation Commission here and take messages from this committee up to Park and Rec. So thank you so much, and carry on.
Are there any comments on Mr. Benson's presentation? Daniel, request for clarification?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, request for 2 clarifications working backwards. Daniel, sorry to see you go. Welcome back. Nice to have you back. Clarification, does that mean that Ms. Longstreet is no longer officially with us? And if so, I'd like to publicly also very much thank her for very incredible insight, experience, participation, and guidance as well. She's been a huge asset to us.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for bringing that up. Ms. Longstreet is no longer the liaison to the committee. I was going to let you know after we took care of this, I'm planning to go present a certificate of appreciation to her at the Park Commission meeting coming up on the 25th, and I've got a little time at the beginning of that meeting to thank her.
Great, thank you. And the second clarification I request is another administrative procedure, if you will. The resignation of Matt O'Brien, to what extent was it sort of directly suggested by the city attorney that there would be a conflict of interest, and to what extent was it that he felt on his own that it would be a conflict? Because the reason I ask is this community, many of our colleagues and our peers and our friends are those we work with and those we hang out with, and should that concern or specter of conflict of interest be too prevalent, we're really going to lose the opportunity for many really excellent qualified people in this community who are most intimately knowledgeable and experienced with the things that we're doing, be able to perform and volunteer on this committee. So I'm kind of concerned about that.
Thanks for the question, Mr. Chair. Mr. Wilson, to my knowledge, nothing was initiated by the city attorney's office. Before Mr. O'Brien applied to serve on the committee, he came to meet with me and we had some discussions. I talked to my supervisor. We thought that we could, as I said, we thought we could avoid any kind of conflict. I think Mr. O'Brien on his own wanted some additional assurances, so he did some additional research. We provided him with a memo from the city attorney's office that was actually written for the ABR and the planning commissioners that talked about the conflict of interest rules and laws. And when it came down to it, if somebody is liable under the conflict of interest laws, they're personally liable. And so he had the potential to become personally liable for a conflict if he did one, even if it was accidental and he didn't intend to violate the law. So that was one issue for him. He didn't want to put his employer at a disadvantage because his employer does bid on city contracts, and he didn't want to put his employer at any kind of disadvantage. And then lastly, the conflict of interest laws, as they're written for a committee such as this, say that if one member of the committee is conflicted out, the whole committee is conflicted out. And so there was a possibility that this committee would not be able to hear an item that was right in the purview of this committee, a contract we were entering, because we had one member whose company wanted to bid on the contract. And so taking all of those things together, Mr. O'Brien was, he didn't leave, I think he left with a heavy heart. I mean, he wants to help out. He wants to be involved. I think that we will see him here from time to time on certain issues. I think he'll continue to monitor what we're doing, and he just felt like, looking at all those factors, he had to step down.
Pity. Thanks for clarifying.
Sure.
Mr. Jordan,
Mr. Chair.
follow-up comment?
I wanted to briefly just tell you, in terms of vacancies too, that I think everybody knows that Mr. Hockman and I both sit on the Lodging and Restaurant Association board, and we have found a willing participant who I'm not going to name yet because apparently there's still 3 more months for that person to back out before interviews. But that particular billet will be pursued and filled as soon as the city opens the process up, and I'm comfortable with that person. That person will be a great addition to this board, has a history of being on and in the water, and has small children, and is also the ownership of their facility is very close to the ocean and is integral upon people enjoying the beach and the creeks. So we will get one billet filled for sure come the middle of the year.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mr. Jordan. Did you have any other communications that you wanted to share with the committee?
No, Mr. Chair, but one point to make now that we had these 2 resignations at the same time is we now have 5 members of the committee. You're all here tonight. We do need to have 4 members here to have a quorum and to take any kind of action, because that's a majority of the committee members. So that means only one person can be absent if we want to have a quorum.
It means that you and I and Liz are going to have to work very carefully before each meeting to make sure what the travel schedules are for the other committee members. I assume as we move toward item number Roger? Sure.
Thank you. I suppose, Mr. Menson, this is not so much for you, but to pass on, it would be nice in these circumstances if we could have a committee member in waiting, so to speak, so that if we have an interim resignation, we wouldn't have to wait for the full cycle to go on. Do you know if the city has ever considered that?
I don't know. Who would be setting up like an alternate type system?
Yeah, a standby or an alternate or something like that.
I can look into that.
I'll take it to E or somebody like that.
Okay, I can look into that also. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. I think that, there's one more committee member and staff communication. I think people who watch the meetings at home realize that the Creeks Group, out of the 1,000 city employees, have the most talented, charming, and hardworking staff in all of public service. And it turns out that one of them went and got married on Valentine's Day. So we have a communication from the committee to our highly valued support staff. Yeah. Now, fortunately, Tony's broadcasting this in color, so if he zooms in, yeah, and for those who are watching the meeting, Liz, whom you often seen helping us make the meeting successful, got married on Valentine's Day and is just recently back to work, and we really, really appreciate all that she does for the success of the program. On item number 7, subcommittee appointments, in terms of ones that Matt had signed up for provisionally and that Daniel was already serving on, do we have some vacancies that we'd have to fill on the standing subcommittees?
Mr. Chair, at our January meeting, we appointed members of the committee to various subcommittees. Mr. O'Brien was appointed to 2 of those subcommittees, the Watersheds Subcommittee and the Outreach and Education Subcommittee. And I put this on the agenda so that the committee could appoint replacements if they wish to do that.
Yeah, thank you. I think you all saw this when the agenda packet was mailed out. We can either do it today or we can give you a few weeks to think about it and do it at the next meeting. Are there people here who'd like to take those vacancies on either of those subcommittees? Don't all speak at once.
Time is not going to help make the decision.
All right. Well, okay. We have it out there, and I'll take it upon myself to confer with the staff and remaining members of the committee to make sure that those slots are filled by the next meeting. Thank you. That brings us to our manager's report. Mr. Benson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Please bear with me. I've got a little cold, and you have to listen to my, my voice a lot in this meeting. I had a couple of things that I wanted to update the committee on, particularly with regard to finances. You're hearing a lot of things in the news, and I wanted to touch on 2 issues specifically that affect our program and the Creeks Division. First, I wanted to talk a little bit about grant funding update. We've seen several changes recently in water quality and restoration grant programs that could have an impact on our existing and future grant prospects. First of all, I wanted to let you know that with regard to the state bonds that have been passed over the last several years, including Proposition 13, 40, 50, and 84. We received an email from the State Department of Water Resources back in the middle of December that was relaying a message from the Department of Finance saying that due to the state's fiscal condition at the time, the Department of Finance was immediately freezing or suspending all of the all general obligation bond invoices and commitments related to those propositions. So the current state of affairs is that the bond money is still frozen, and what we are hearing, or I'll relay to you the rumors that I'm hearing, is that it will remain frozen for the remainder of this fiscal year, which takes us through June 30th, and may thaw out sometime in the next fiscal year. I suspect it'll be. I suspect that the best case scenario is maybe late summer, but we'll keep the committee posted on that. The direct impact to the Creeks Division from that freeze are on two programs we have that are currently funded through grants from those state bonds, and those are the Laguna Watershed Study and the Microbial Source Tracking Research Protocol Development Project that we're working on. After we received notice of the freeze, we decided to look back at those projects, even though we do have some money budgeted, and see how best to move forward. I mean, early on we didn't really have very much information at all. We didn't want to just proceed full speed ahead on the projects. So what we did was we decided to proceed on a very limited basis to keep those projects moving forward, but only at the absolutely necessary steps. So, for example, with the Laguna Watershed Study, we had done all of the testing and data collection, and they were just putting the study together. So we decided we would go ahead and finish the study. We'll probably have that study presented to the committee next month, but we decided to delay moving forward with any of the design work at this time until we have more information about the grant funding. With regard to the microbial source tracking, we decided to move forward with some seasonally dependent data collection. We've put off some of our equipment purchases and some of the data collection that can be done at a later time until we know we've got the grant funding available or that we'll be reimbursed for any spending. So we'll continue to monitor that situation very closely and move forward cautiously. The Creeks Division has two existing grants right now from the Department of Fish and Game through their Fisheries Restoration Grant Program that we don't believe are affected by the bond freeze, and the reason for that is that grant fund is funded through state and federal annual budgets, not through the bonds. And those two grants are for the final design on the Talent Road Fish Passage and the final design on the Highway 192 Fish Passage. We also received a grant through the California Resources Agency, or the Southern California Wetlands Recovery Project Small Grant Program, and that grant is for part of the Upper Las Positas Creek Restoration Project that we're going to hear about tonight, and it's specifically for the portion of that project on Adams School property. That funding comes from a nonprofit organization called the Earth Island Institute, and so that money is still available. We have 4 pending grant applications that could be affected either by the bond freeze or just by the general state of the economy, depending on how the federal and state budgets move forward. Those include grant applications for a San Pasqual storm drain improvement, Mission Creek Fish Passage at the Caltrans Channel, Upper Las Positas Creek Restoration and Stormwater Management Project, and the Mission Creek Fish Passage at Talent Road. Future grant opportunities will also be affected. Obviously, if the bonds remain frozen, all of those programs that were bond funded will not exist. If the bonds become unfrozen, we will continue to apply for appropriate grants for our program. But in addition to those, there is also the stimulus funds that are available through the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, and we are closely monitoring those programs as they become available. There are two programs right now. One is through the Department of Water Resources, through a Clean Water state revolving fund that is usually set up as a loan program. They're going to make it a grant program with this additional revenue. And the second program we're looking at is through the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, and that is a coastal and marine restoration grant program. And so we are looking at projects that may be able to be funded through that new legislation as well. And then lastly, we are continuing to work with private, generally nonprofit partners in our projects to work with private foundations to try to provide funding for our capital program. And the example we have is where the Creeks Division partnered with the Environmental Defense Center and secured a grant from the Annenberg Foundation for the Mission Creek Fish Passage at the Caltrans Channel. And we ended up with a $180,000 grant from a private foundation to help move that project forward. So we're going to continue to work on those partnerships. And then that's it for the grant program. Lastly, I wanted to just give a quick update on the fiscal year 2009 revenue projections. Due to the declining year-over-year transient occupancy tax revenues, the city's finance department has reduced its FY09 revenue projections for the Creeks Division, and the revenue projection reduction is just under $110,000, and that's for this year, which ends June 30th. We have the Creeks Division, in response to that, has reduced our expenditures by the same amount going forward in the second half of the year for contracted services, materials, and special projects in order to maintain a balanced budget. And I'd be happy to answer any questions. Yeah.
So, Mr. Benson, as I understand it, even though the governor indicated not very long ago that global warming is a key issue for California, when it comes to bonds, he's frozen them. Okay. And I would like to point out that the past president of the Earth Island Institute, who's helped make these funds available for Santa Barbara, is Dr. Bob Wilkinson, who's out at UCSB, who succeeded David Brower as the head of Earth Island. So if you run into Bob among his many good works, please tell him thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Benson on his report? Mr. Jordan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I'll just ask one negative question, then we're going to get out of that negative news. Are you already starting then to look at revising next fiscal year's projections that you were given for TOT and how that will affect our budget?
You want the long answer?
Just yes.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Okay.
We do have FY10 projections from Department of Finance now. Whether those will be revised before we actually begin the fiscal year 10 is another question.
Do they do that concurrently with what's going on with the real budget, or is that, I mean, because I know like there's an 11% mandate department-wide type of thing being forced down in the general fund. Are you following that process along, or do you just get out of that and start worrying about TOT by itself?
Because the Creeks Division is almost exclusively funded through TOT, that's what I'm focused on, as well as the grant availability that we discussed.
I guess I phrased that wrong. Is the city focused on that yet?
But of course, you know, the Creeks Division receives 2% of TOT. The city general fund receives 10% of the TOT. It's a significant portion of the city's general fund budget, and so yes, they're very focused on it.
Okay. And then enough with the bad news. The good news is, I don't know if anybody's seen it yet, but started, I think last weekend, there's I don't know because I haven't seen it yet, but you're going to tell me about it. I think there's a 3-part series on Inside Santa Barbara all this month having to do with creeks. And I think you can say more than I know. I
don't have the don't have the dates for it, so I can't tell you those. But yes, the folks over at City TV are working on several different programs about the Creeks Division. We have a program about you all. That's a program about the Creeks Advisory Committee, and it's going to explain what the committee is and what the committee does and who's on the committee. We have they're working on another program that will show the Upper Las Positas Creek Restoration Project that's going to be happening over at the golf course. They're working on a what's the other interview you did, Mike? There's a third one. What am I missing? Oh, thanks. They're also working on a program about the other item we're going to see tonight, the Creek Tree program and the Business Assistance Program. So that's another opportunity for us to get that information out to the public and let people know that those programs are available. So they always do a great job putting their shows together. So we're happy to have their help.
I think Mr. Wilson had a question, and Mr. Schluter as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Benson, just briefly, generally, so if the fiscal year budget for the Creeks Division is reduced by $110,000, does that come out of capital improvement or materials, or where does that reduction occur? And no need to be specific.
It'll come out of the operating budget. We have places where we've realized significant savings already through the year, and so we identified places where we thought we could cut without getting squeezed. That money would have ended up at the end of the year if it were unspent. It would have gone into our unappropriated
great.
reserve.
Thank you. And the second question is the Upper Las Positas, well, the golf course project that I believe went back to bid in the last 2 months, went out to public bid. Is this an okay time for a real brief update on what's happening with that?
If, as you remember from looking at your agenda, that's going to be item number 10, and we're going to have a very detailed report. But as I understand it, and I'm sure George can confirm it, the final bids will not actually be opened until several days after this meeting. So George,
for the nexus for the next agenda item. Thank you.
Well, George, as the project manager, has been tracking it very carefully, and I'm sure he's pretty confident that he has a good idea of that there are going to be some responsive bidders within the parameters that we set up. It's just that we're going to have an extensive report from him in a moment, and it probably will not include the final bid winner. Roger, did you have a question? Okay, so that would bring us, if there's nothing else on number 8, brings us to item number 9, subcommittee reports. I think since the last meeting, we've had meetings of the Education and Outreach Subcommittee and the Budget Subcommittee. Mr. Benson, do you want to give an overview of those? We can have committee members pitch in.
Just quickly, I just wanted to mention that we did have those two subcommittee meetings. The Outreach and Education Subcommittee met on January 26th. That's Mr. Moldaver, Mr. Hockman, and Mr. Jordan. And we discussed potential revisions to the 2002 Public Education Plan. And we talked about education goals. We talked about outreach tactics. We talked about effectiveness assessment. And we had a pretty constructive meeting, and then staff was sent back to start plugging some of those things into the existing education plan. And I don't know if any of the committee members have any additional comments.
Yeah, well, I think it's important for the people who are watching the meeting to understand that the purpose of this process is to fine-tune our next segment of community outreach to build upon the information we got from a recent survey which asked the community and asked businesses which parts of creek and watershed and beach cleanliness and health they understand and support, and in what areas we can refine our message going out to make sure that we're hitting as many people with accurate information as possible. And that means that in terms of our media and outreach budget, it's going to be much more focused and fine-tuned as the staff comes up with recommendations to use this new data. And it means that there's going to be less waste, and the things we've found that are going well we'll continue to try to do. The things that are already clearly understood we'll probably do less. And the things that we have to do to really get the message across in some areas where there's still some confusion or lack of compliance, we're really going to try to focus on those. So I want people to understand that the money that we're getting for Measure B is being focused very, very carefully. And people sometimes hear the PSAs on radio or TV or in the newspaper, and they wonder if those are doing any good or to what audience they're addressed. And the answer is, of course, that the city is studying very, very carefully the response to the outreach campaigns and trying to fine-tune them to get the best results possible. And I think in the second half of this year and into next year, you'll start to see the results of that program refinement.
And then, Mr. Chair, we had a budget subcommittee meeting on February 12th. That's Mr. Moldaver, Mr. Weber, and Mr. Schluter. This was the first of probably at least 2 subcommittee meetings that we will have before we have a presentation to the full committee. The scope of the conversation was kind of big picture. We talked about, we didn't get into specific numbers. We didn't get into a line-by-line analysis of the proposed budget, and still working on pulling that together. We talked about the broader economy. We talked about the city budget. We talked about TOT. As you all know, the budget, we have our operating budget. We also have a capital budget. The capital budget will reflect what the committee had recommended for the capital program back at our August meeting, so there won't be any surprises for anyone there. We also talked about grants. So we will probably be scheduling another meeting of the budget subcommittee in April, probably third or fourth week in April, and then we'll have a presentation to the full committee on the budget at our May meeting.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Benson on the budget process? Okay, that would bring us to item number 10, and that would be 10A, Upper Las Positas Creek Restoration and Stormwater Management, where George will help give us an update.
Thank you, Chair Manager and committee members. I'm going to be rather brief today because all of you have seen this project before. I just want to give an update on where we are in the project, what our anticipated costs are, and the timeline going forward. Where's our... Okay, first of all, to clear up some of the confusion on the name of the project, I know Mr. Wilson kind of tripped over this. We're calling it the Upper Las Positas Creek Restoration and Stormwater Management Project. We've referred to it off the cuff as the golf course project because the majority of the project is at the golf course. But really, it affects much more than just the golf course. Here's where the project is located at the Santa Barbara Golf Course. It's within the Arroyo Burro watershed and specifically on the Las Positas Creek stem, which is one of 3 major contributaries to Arroyo Burro Creek. Now, I said it affects more than the golf course because we're taking water from the Adams School, Samarkand neighborhood, San Jose Lane neighborhood, and diverting that to the golf course and treating it there. So a couple things that we hope to do on this project: improve urban runoff and stormwater quality through a number of physical, biological, and chemical treatments, including the use of detention basins, bioswales, and pocket wetlands. We're also using a diversion pipe, which leads into the next goal of the project, which is to reduce flooding both on-site and downstream. This diversion pipe is going to take water from a residential neighborhood and basically put it onto the golf course where we can then treat it. The golf course just happens to be one of the largest open spaces in the city where we can actually do something of this scale. So we're reducing flooding on Stevens Road, which is where the existing storm drain empties out and then flows right down the middle of the road. We're also reducing flooding downstream in Las Positas Creek at the concrete channel on Las Positas Channel. Another big component of this project is community outreach and education. We've got a relatively new part of the project at Adams School where we're working with the students and teachers to build a rain garden and bioswale there. And then we're also doing some temporary and permanent signage on the project, both at the Adams School and at the golf course. So right now we're in the construction bid phase. As you recall, we bid one phase of the project back in August, and we ended up rejecting that bid because it was over budget, and we only got one bid. So we weren't really confident that we were getting the best bang for our buck. So we went back to the drawing board and combined the two phases of the project and stuck to our original timeline. Now we're out to bid right now with anticipated construction in May. Another development in this project is that the golf course, the golf division, has several projects that they've been pushing forward as part of their master safety improvement plan. And we got together with the golf division and looked at what they were doing and what we were doing and decided, why don't we put these two together, bid them as one project, and we decided to do that for a number of reasons. First, we can take an increased scale of the project to hopefully draw more bidders because we can take advantage of the economy of scale there. We also have excess fill soil from the Creeks Division project, and we would have to get rid of that somehow, either on-site, losing it in landscaping, or truck it off-site, which is really expensive. So the Golf Division project actually needs soil. It just works out that they need just about as much as we're getting rid of. So we're saving money there. It's a no-brainer. We're also considering the overall construction time of the project, not only our project but their project. If we did them separately, the golf course would be under construction for a longer period of time. So by combining them, the two, we can restrict our impact on play. And then for the Creeks Division, it's really important that we're not paying for any of the Golf Division work. And the way that we've done that is we've arranged our bid schedules so that the Creeks Division, our projects are in line items, and the Golf Division has their own separate bid schedule, and the same for the payment schedule. So I'm confident that we can keep track of our accounting and not end up paying for anything that we're not supposed to. So this is a breakdown of our construction cost estimates, and again, as Mr. Moldaver mentioned earlier, the bids are out right now. We haven't received them yet, so the construction costs right now are only what we've received from our design engineers. They're not the actual cost of construction. Associated with any construction project that we do, we throw in about 10% to cover any unanticipated costs that we just can't foresee right now. And then we've got city staff in there from the engineering department and building and safety. They are involved with the project, and we've got them as a line item. We also have our consultant design engineer provide information during the bid phase and during construction, so we need to cover their costs. And then we have several materials testing. That includes concrete, soils, things like that during construction that we need to be sure the concrete that they're putting down for the spillway and so forth are actually what are in the spec. We've got a pre-construction wildlife survey to make sure that we're not impacting any nesting birds. And then the building permit, which is a city requirement that we also have to pay as a city project. And then a large portion of the project is the creation of bioswales, detention basins, and pocket wetlands, which are all going to be vegetated. And we need to buy the plants that are going to vegetate those areas. We also have landscape trees. In some portions of the golf course, we're removing trees. We've agreed, since we're removing them, we're going to put a couple of those back. And we're doing basically 3-to-1 replacement. And not all of those are landscape trees per se, and by landscape I mean horticultural type species. We're also using native, locally native trees there. And then I mentioned the interpretive signage is a big part of the post-construction project. But in order to get those in the ground as soon as construction is done, we need to have those in development. So we're looking at a total estimated cost of about $1.7 million there. So the bids are due next Wednesday, and I'll say that we had our bid walk a couple weeks ago, and over 60 individuals showed up. So I'm pretty confident that we're going to have a good turnout on the bids. The project goes to City Council on April 14th to hopefully award contract, and then we're going to have a groundbreaking ceremony at Adams School in early May. So construction will actually begin in mid-May, and we've estimated 90 working days, which is about 120 calendar days, and that puts us into mid-September for finishing this project up. But once it's done, we're not walking away. We're making sure that plants fill in, that we're taking care of the site, and also continuing our water quality monitoring and plant monitoring on the project. And I'll take any questions that you might have.
Thank you, George. Excellent update. Michael?
Well, I'll jump to no questions and just recall that most of us, I think, have walked this project. The last time we talked about this project, I think we talked extensively about what to expect when we were ready to start building this project, that it would be an all Measure B funds project. And this is, and again, I think the consensus then and should still be now that this is exactly why we have however many $1 million set aside in that non-appropriated pile of money for projects like this. In addition to what I think you guys already know, it's and numbers that you've presented before that I think are even have grown better as time's gone on. In addition to dealing with the toxins up at the golf course, it also continues to take volume out of the runoff that continues down Arroyo Burro and causes problems everywhere down there. It's also going to be a visible, attractive piece of something in the ground like Arroyo Burro estuary rather than a manhole or something that's underneath the ground. And it's not just the education component at the school, but it's also an education component on the golf course for use for kids there too. And I think you have to remember also that the opportunities to do things like this are few and far between. As you move east across the other watersheds, there is no open land or collectors to do this. It's all private property or little teeny channels. So I'd be happy to make the motion when the time is right to move this along to, well, then let me read it, and then if anybody else has comments, I'll be happy to let them do that. But I'd move then that we recommend to Council to authorize transferring funds from the Creek's unappropriated reserve to cover the construction costs and to authorize proceeding with construction.
It's been moved by Mr. Jordan and seconded by Mr. Wilson. Are there any questions or comments on the motion or questions for George on his overview and report? Roger?
Yes, I have a question on the motion. Is that motion needed at this meeting, or would we better serve by having that motion after we have the bids and presumably a winner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We scheduled it for this meeting, even though we won't receive the bids until next week, a week from tonight. But we're scheduled to go to City Council on April 14th, which is less than a week after we have our next meeting, and so we wouldn't be able to put the committee's recommendation into the council's staff report if we didn't have a recommendation. And you know, the dollar amounts, the estimated dollar amounts or costs of this project are within the range that we brought to you back in August or September. But we wanted to come back just for a short presentation to talk about the combination of the Gulf Division project with the project you were familiar with, but also to notify you and notify the public we are going to be going to the City Council next month, and we just wanted to give you the most recent information we had before going to that meeting.
Okay, thank you. The idea of the getting on the calendar is what I needed. I would also just make as an aside comment, I think the idea of going together with the golf group is an excellent idea, and I compliment the staff for doing that. I think that's money well served on both sides. And lastly, just out of curiosity, who does the building permit money go to?
It goes to the city, actually.
So it comes out of one pocket and goes into another.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, I wanted to say one thing that kind of goes to Mr. Jordan's comments. I appreciate his support for the project. It has been sort of our longstanding plan of the committee to do this transfer from reserve. It doesn't have anything to do with the economic condition. I think we've been planning to do that for over a year now. We've just been waiting till we knew what the number was to transfer from the reserve. But really what I wanted to say was, yes, we're looking at all Measure B funds for this project other than the small grant we have from the Wetlands Recovery Project, but that hasn't stopped us from applying for a lot of grants. I think we've applied for and been denied on at least five separate grant applications. But having said that, we have one pending with the Department of Water Resources right now for approximately $300,000. That was supposed to be, they were supposed to have made a decision on that this month, but that's Prop 84 money, so it's on hold. It is possible that when that money is unfrozen, that they can retroactively award the grants and we would be able to be reimbursed that funding. And we're also looking at the ARA money, at the stimulus funds that are available for green infrastructure and water quality projects, and we're going to be applying for those funds as well. So even though we're getting closer and closer to construction, we're still trying to identify opportunities to bring in grant funds.
Mr. Chair, one last question. Following on what Mr. Jordan said, this will be one of the most visible projects, especially during the construction period. I would suggest that maybe Santa Barbara TV would be interested in following this project because of its incredible visibility.
Yeah, we're actually working with City TV. They've been on this project since before we started design, and so every chance that I get, I give them a call for the bid walk they're filming. They're going to be there for the groundbreaking, so by the end of it, we'll have a nice little piece on the project from start to finish.
Great minds.
All right. I think that Mr. Wilson and Mr. Hockman had comments. Daniel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So here's the what-if question. What if the bids come back some percentage above the estimate? I think it's worth just the brief discussion that we have now if we're putting our sort of seal of endorsement on it before we know what it might be.
Well,
so is there,
do you remember Mr. Jordan's comments late last summer that he insisted that the project had to come in within our budget specs, and I assume it was implicit in his motion tonight that our support of this proposal is that it comes in within the parameters that our staff has discussed with our House liaison and the committee.
Let me blow that thought out of your mind, because actually the intent of my motion would be that we kind of know this is a direction we want to go, and we have responsible staff that will make that decision when they see the numbers or determine that it's a big enough deal to bring it back to us and put a halt to it. So my endorsement is that we're endorsing the project and then trusting the staff to do the right thing. If anybody else has issue with that, then they can back off of their support for that endorsement.
So being that I posed the question, I don't have heartburn or heartbreak with that. I do support staff to make the right decision. I do think it's fiscally prudent to bring that question to the committee for at least to be aware of.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Wilson. And I assume your second to the motion to approve this project and the staff recommendation contains those thoughts. I think Mr. Weber had a question.
Thank you, Chair. First, let me echo Mr. Jordan and Mr. Schluter's enthusiasm for the project. I think this is definitely one of the city's future great achievements. I just had one question on your last point, actually right there, just trying to be mindful of being fiscally responsible. Can you remind the committee who's going to be handling the site maintenance and monitoring going forward?
We've committed to about 5 years of on-site maintenance, and that's only the Creeks Division project. Within the first 5 years, I'm expecting 2 of those 5 years, the first 2 years, are going to be the most expensive and the most time consuming because plants are filling in. The project is getting established. After those 5 years, we're handing it over to the Golf Division. That's the assumption right now. And I say handing it off, but at the same time, we're not going to just walk away from it. We're going to be looking at the project and making sure that they're doing a good job. If they need help, I think that we'll help them.
Is actually Creek staff going to handle the
Well, it'll
maintenance?
be part of our regular landscape maintenance, but we will do the monitoring, and we've got an extensive water quality monitoring program there.
And I take it that's going to be part of the operations budget then? Or is that actually built in the...
In the past, on some of our larger restoration projects, like at the Arroyo Burro Estuary, we included some funds for ongoing maintenance in the project budget, in the capital budget for the project. We're going to be proposing to change that, I think, next year, in that we will move those funds over into the operating budget. So our capital budget will get us through construction and some of the post-construction activities like the signage and so forth, but the ongoing maintenance will appear as a line item each year for the different projects. We'll probably break out different projects, and then we'll know, over time, how much do these projects cost going forward, and it will help us with our budgeting. It'll help us with our decision making on those large restoration projects as we go forward. And what we see over time, generally speaking, is the costs go down. I mean, the plants become established. They need less care, less watering, and so our costs decline. So the older projects that we have are getting cheaper and cheaper, and the new ones start us up again. So those will begin next year to appear as operating budget costs.
Great.
I think our liaison from Parks and Recreation, Mr. Hockman, has a couple of observations.
I do. I think, first of all, if there is a concern on the budget of transfer from our reserves, it might be prudent to put a limit on the recommendation of the transfer from reserves. In other words, the committee could put a motion forward instead of just authorizing transfer from reserves to cover the project cost. You could put a limit and say up to a certain amount. Now, I suggest that we all realize that all of these decisions will be done by City Council in any case, and likely they will use calm heads with the recommendations of our staff. And I think we're making a pretty clear statement here that we don't want, or that the committee doesn't want the reserve to be depleted to finish this project. And so you have the choice whether to change the motion or to continue as is, and either way is fine with me. My question, though, was on the trees that are coming out and the replacements. You mentioned two things. One, you said you thought that it would be good for us to replace a couple of the trees, and then you said there was a 3-to-1 replacement ratio. Is that 3 new trees for each 1 tree taken out, or the other way around?
Correct. It's 3 new trees for every 1 taken out.
And how many are being taken out, do we know?
94, but my survey of those trees, that includes everything from about my height to 60 feet or so.
Okay. And will those be replaced with mature trees?
No, they won't.
Okay,
No.
so are a number of mature trees being taken out?
Yes.
So are we looking at what happens to habitat with that? I know that there are a number
Absolutely.
of hawks and other kinds of...
We did 4 raptor surveys over this winter, and including one of them with a UCSB biologist. And his initial assessment is that with the number of trees that we have on the golf course, including large, mature eucalyptus trees that are favored by red-shoulder hawks and red-tail hawks, that there are sufficient resources there.
Okay.
Yeah, if you recall, there was a line item.
It's about 72,000 for...
No,
both
it was
native
the
plants and landscape.
5,000 pre-construction wildlife survey.
Yes, I did see that too. I
Yeah.
just wanted to make sure that this was one of the absolute considerations.
Absolutely.
And I assume also that we're taking the opportunity, if there were trees that might be considered possibly inappropriate for the area, that the selection that we're using to go in, we're not just doing replacements, we're doing
Improvements.
yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Wonderful.
We've worked with the golf course manager, the golf course architect to make sure that what we're putting in is compatible with them.
Great. Thank you.
Are there any further questions or comments for the staff? Since we have a motion on the floor and we have another item trailing behind it. Mr. Wilson?
Thank you, Chair. What is the maintenance budget for 5 years?
We're looking at $25,000 for each of the first 2 years, and then my estimate for the next 3 years is about $10,000 to $15,000.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to thank George again. The concentration with which he and his team and the entire staff have tracked this project, I think, are really commendable. And while I intend to support Mr. Jordan's motion, if there are any potential bidders out there who haven't submitted yet, I think Mr. Hockman is right. The administrator and the finance office are really looking for bidders to be responsible and responsive. And since there are guidelines and suggestions for what the range is, people can bid for whatever they want, but their chances of winning will probably be affected by stepping outside those guidelines. But this is a great project, and we have a motion and a second to advise the City Council to move this process along. So if there are no further questions or comments, all those in favor of the motion to recommend to City Council approval of this project signify by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? Are there any abstentions? I let the record show that the motion is carried unanimously. And George, thank you again.
Thank you.
That brings us to item 10B, the Creek Tree Program. Creek Supervisor George Johnson will give us an update in the status report. George?
Oh, okay. Hi. Didn't have the mic on. So I'm going to talk about the Creek Tree Program and the Business Assistant Program tonight. We don't have a lot of slides. I'm just going to show you a picture of a creek with some trees on it, and that'll suffice for the PowerPoint. But as you guys remember, yeah, there it is. The Creeks Advisory Committee recommended this program for approval about 6 months ago in September. And at that time, the committee had requested that we provide 6-month status reports on the program for the first 18 months. So it's been 6 months since the approval. And that's what we're doing today, is to provide a status report on this as well as the Business Assistance Program. If you guys don't remember, I'll just give you, and for people who are on TV or who are watching on TV, the program basically is designed to assist property owners to improve wildlife habitat for those property owners that live next to city creeks. And the city's assisting them by providing up to $1,000 in services to plant trees, provide the trees, and put the irrigation in. And then the property owners can choose to have more work done on their property, up to $5,000, but at that point they have to contribute some money. So the first $1,000 is free, and that's what's nice about the program. They don't have to do anything except agree to the contract and agree to maintain the trees, and they can get however many trees we can fit in there for $1,000, and that's dependent on the site. But so that's what we're offering for the public to use. It's a voluntary program. I just want to make that clear to everyone watching on TV, as well as the Creeks Committee members. We're not forcing people to plant trees on their property, and it's all voluntary. So in terms of the status, the program was temporarily delayed due to finalizing the contracts and the guidelines and the application form. We did finally get all that approved, and that is attached in your packet in January of 2009. After that, we put in our first project, and we've had only one project so far in the 6 months, and that was at the Housing Authority property, and that's the that's the property that you guys did visit when you made the recommendation. At that site, we put in 27 trees, 17 oak trees, 7 sycamores, and 3 cottonwoods, and put in a simple a drip irrigation system for them. And so far, the trees look good, and they're growing well, so it's turned out good. In terms of additional marketing or promotion of the program, the first thing we did in January, once all the contract stuff was approved, is we identified a site on Mission Creek, which is east of Vernon Road. It's on the east bank of Mission Creek, mostly on Alomar, and we sent out about 20 letters to the property owners there, along with the guidelines and an application form, so that we could just kind of prime people on what the program's about. And then we waited a couple weeks and made some phone calls to all those people to talk to them about the program. We did receive one application back in the mail, and we have met with that applicant, and it looks like we can do something there. It's not a very big project, only a couple of trees, but it is something, and it's on Mission Creek, and they were interested. So they're still thinking about it, and we're still looking at that site. So there is a maybe there. The rest of the property owners we contacted were not interested in the program. There were a few that were kind of interested, and I persuaded as best as I could, but none of them were ready to fill out an application at that point. And so from there, that's just basically the results of what we've done so far to try to do it. It wasn't what I would say real successful. I don't know if that's the best approach. I think we could try it in some other locations around the city, but we feel like that once the program builds a little more momentum, that word of mouth and maybe meeting individually with property owners that look like they're very suited for the project, either from our creek walks or from people telling us that might be a better approach to try to meet with them and talk to them about the program. And then we also, along with the mailing, we put it on our city website, on our Creeks website, and then on our Creeks e-newsletter. And we have yet to get anything from that. In the future, we're also hoping to work with some of the nonprofits in the city. They've come forward to say that they could assist us and put it on their websites and their newsletters. So we hope to get some leads through that. And we also hope that through just this, presenting it on TV, through the Creeks Advisory Committee meetings, and anything that you members might be able to do to promote the program, let people know about it. It's pretty simple. If they want to find out more about it, they just have to go to sbcreeks.com, and we have all the guidelines and the application on there, and it's my phone number's there, so people can call me up and ask me any questions about it. I think that is about it. I don't think there's anything else. We are going to have it, as we talked about earlier, on the TV program for City TV. So that we'll have a segment on the Creek Tree program as well as the business assistance program. And I don't think there's anything else. So I'll take any questions. Just for those people on TV, I just want to let them know again this is a voluntary program and that the city is providing $1,000 of services to plant trees for those properties next to creeks. It's specific to trees properties next to the creek and not anywhere else.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Thank you, George. Excellent report. Let me ask you a question before we open it to the rest of the committee. In your outreach to other property owners, did you have a chance to meet with the Red Cross office, which is right along the creek at State and Alomar?
No, we didn't. We had talked with someone from the Urban Creeks Council. Had been actively trying to do a project there for a little while, and we hadn't heard much from that. So we thought we would talk to them about it, and we have talked to them actually about that project before. It seems to have the enthusiasm seems to have kind of died out on that. So we didn't talk to them specifically. But we could. That's not a bad idea.
With the 2 local fires in the last year, their administration has been pretty busy. Did you also share this information about the program support with the Santa Barbara Board of Realtors, Santa Barbara Beautiful, and the 3 locally based men's and women's garden clubs?
No, we have not gone to any of the garden clubs or the real estate association. We have worked with Santa Barbara Beautiful in the past, and they do provide us funding to do specific projects, but they don't really seem to do much of the promotion part of it as far as I've seen. It's kind of up to us to pick a site, and then they'll provide us funding to implement it. But it wouldn't hurt to contact
but
them.
I thought maybe a link on their website so that people who go to their site in terms of advice or information about the services they have available might see that and cut over and realize that this program was available.
Sure.
Okay, are there any other, I think Mr. Schluter has a question for Mr. Thompson.
Any outreach to the T-Fire area residents?
No, what we figured is that we would wait for a year till after the rains to go into that area, just because if there are any significant rains and you're putting in small trees, you can lose them quite easily, as well as the irrigation. You just have a lot of stuff washing down the slope. So we figured we'd let that settle in a little bit before we talk to them. Plus, they're pretty busy and kind of overwhelmed.
There is intent to reach out to that area.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
In follow-up to Roger's question, the city ombudsman that the city council of the administrator have appointed to expedite plan check and rebuilding for people who suffered losses in the area. Are they aware of this program? So as people come through to inquire about rebuilding, or the insurance people contact the city or whatever, that'll pop up either in their head or on their screen, and they can provide that information automatically to anyone who comes in who might be interested.
Yeah, we could do that. We have to be a little careful with this program. It's pretty specific that you cannot get trees as part of a development project, so it can't be mitigation for anything. So it's a little gray there, but it wouldn't hurt to contact them and let them know about the program.
But if it's a rebuilding program within the actual creek watershed, as opposed to just free beautification somewhere unrelated to Sycamore Creek, that might be a possibility. But Mr. Jordan, did you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know it's early, but I was sitting out there being a little grumpy in that and getting eaten by those insects that night on the project. But I'm a little disturbed by one of the phrases in there that, based on what you've done so far, that the goal in the next 6 or 12 months is to do one per month.
Right.
And we've kind of been doing it for 6 months, and we've only done one. So that worries me. And so I'm wondering, you recall, I think, back out at the site when we talked about it before, I think I had some concerns at that time. I think I was the only one with concerns on whether the price structure was a draw or it was driving people away, whether we needed a component for low-income people and that type of thing. So I'm wondering, is there a sense that you have on people's reluctance because their particular project is bigger than $1,000 and it starts to involve cost sharing, or is that's just not present? It's just I just don't want to do a project.
Yeah, they're just not interested.
Okay. Yeah. Then my only other comment was, I'm sure which will go over big with the city structure, was whether we had ever considered using social media as a method for advertising.
Social media. What do you mean by that?
I don't want to name names, but let's just say that if we had a group on a social media site, or the City Creeks Department had a group on the social media site that people would subscribe to, and the exponential gain there, that if I'm an acquaintance with Daniel, and we share the same pursuits, I then get to see the groups that Daniel is associated with and exhibit my interest in them. So you're exponentially reaching out to a greater group of people than just knowing Daniel, but just by association. We could talk more about this later.
Yeah,
I'll name names.
Maybe I'm a little thick on that one.
Okay.
I'm not getting it.
It's all right. I'll play with you with that. But the answer is no so far, right? Okay.
No,
okay.
we haven't done that. Yeah,
All right.
I've explained to you everything we've done. The only other thing that I didn't say we did was we did approach a couple of property owners that had in the past said, "Oh, we'd be interested in doing some kind of restoration on our property," and to date, they have not responded to any of my.
I think there's some
inquiries, so-
opportunity there, and I think again, it's like some things I've suggested in the past, like commercials at city council meetings when they take a 5-minute break that turns into 20 minutes, and again, I think it's just someday this is going to be commonplace. It's just, are we the first one in, or do we just join the crowd when everybody else finally jumps in? So, so I'd like to pursue that more, and I'll talk with you and Cameron on that.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the update, George. I have a quick question. I'm wondering if it might give us a little frame of reference, and that's what was the approximate price tag on that housing authority?
Well, we had estimated at $3,500, and I don't have all the invoices in, but the preliminary cost right now is about $2,800 to $2,900, somewhere between there.
And that got 27 trees in a drip system? Well, that's
Yep.
not bad. Good. And I remember we were talking there that there was some possibility of the local youth getting involved with the...
Yeah, they did. They came
did,
out and helped
yeah.
plant. The
Great,
kids did, for
great.
sure. But the reason we're not playing that up is that's not really the focus
No,
of,
it's
of
more
the
a
program.
curiosity question.
We didn't want to mislead any people that they had to bring volunteers or something to do it. That's something that we did do because of the housing authority and the fact that all the kids live right there on the creek. So that was fun. But, yeah, we did do
Great,
it.
thanks.
Anything else on this part of the report? Daniel?
Thank you, Chair. I have 2 questions.
Sure.
The first question is actually directed to the public watching, and that question is this the type of program that you would like to have available to you? And is there any aspect of this program that you'd like to see possibly expanded? Is the cost too little, too much? Is that prohibitive? Are there other aspects in addition to tree planting and drip irrigation that might be helpful? This is a great start, and it sounds like you've covered quite a few of the bases really well in moving forward with this, and I'm encouraged to see hopefully more public response. And this is a call out to the public listening that this is a program that's being developed for you specifically to help you. So please contact city staff and let them know if this is something that sounds good, and or offer suggestions to make it more agreeable and user-friendly for you. So that's the question for the public. Now, the question for Creek staff is specifically focuses on, shall we say, the semantical editing from the city attorney's office of the documents, in particular the contract, the contractual agreement, the Creek Tree Program Agreement. And clearly this is heavily filtered by the city attorney's office. And in particular, I want to look at Section 7, which is the indemnification clause. And being that I, too, am a resident and own property with a creek on it, I read this indemnity clause, and actually being in the construction industry and that I write contracts myself and I've hired attorneys to write them for me, I recognize this clause, and this is a Type 1 indemnity clause. There's Type 1, 2, and 3, and I'll spare the details. But the point is someone reading this indemnity clause, this in itself is probably going to be enough to scare 99+% of the people away from engaging in any sort of thing like this. And I think a Type 1 indemnity clause is probably pretty inappropriate for this and may actually be legally not appropriate based upon recent court ruling.
Well,
So that's something that I'd actually encourage you to communicate directly with the city attorney's office and see if a Type 2 or a Type 3 indemnity clause could happen in here to soften this down so that people are actually not completely scared away by this. So this is just to get in the door.
well, number one, the item listed on the agenda is a 6-month status report on the program. And I am not suggesting that your concerns about the wording are inappropriate, but number one, our council liaison, Councilwoman Falcone, has a law degree and meets with the city attorney's office all the time. I think that if we have significant concerns about agenda items that are contained in the agenda packet before the meeting, it's a lot more utilitarian to share them with the staff or with our council liaison or with our program manager in advance rather than go on live TV and ask a city employee to interpret what may or may not be language that came from someone in the city attorney's office, which also is several different people. So I don't disagree with you that it's strong, direct language, but I think the agenda item under the Brown Act, which is to receive a 6-month status report, is being covered, and you have a very specific technical question about the legal wording that's attached to the program that perhaps you could discuss either with Mr. Benson or the city attorney's office, between now and the next meeting, or we could ask Mr. Benson and Mr. Thompson to bring back some information, or if they feel it's necessary, we could even invite someone from the city attorney's office to attend our meeting. I can't imagine anything more mirthful for them to do to spend a future dinner hour than to come and join us.
With all due respect, Chair, I actually completely disagree with you. I think this is an entirely appropriate time to bring something like this up, because as a public meeting, being that this is the agenda item, if I can't offer a recommendation or a suggestion or an observation on this, then there's actually no point in actually even really having this here. We could just not have the public meeting at all. But I appreciate your information. Thanks. And that's my just my two questions. Thank you.
And I can try to respond to that. The first thing is we obviously can talk to the city attorney and see if that's possible. I mean, that's not out of the question, just to look at that language. And the second thing is nobody's gone to this detail and then backed out yet. Just so you guys know, the people that we talked to, they got the application and the guidelines. And at that point, it seemed not to be so much process, but just general interest in the property owners. You know, they just weren't very interested in planting trees. They either thought they had enough or didn't want any trees or whatever it was. So I just want to communicate that was it. But that doesn't mean that this could not become a stumbling block in the future, for people that do want to participate. All right. So is there any more questions?
I think Mr. Hockman from Parks and Recreation had a question.
I do. It's not a park and recreation question, and I'm shuddering a little bit because it is a question on the contract, but it doesn't turn to legalities of anything, simply intent of the document. And because I know that when we were having our meeting, we were talking about consequences, and there is a reimbursement clause in the contract, and there's also a clause that that defines what good maintenance of the improvements are. To me, they don't seem to match each other. In other words, it looks like we say that for a minimum of 5 years, the applicant should keep all of the improvements in good condition. And then we determine through A through F what those conditions, what good condition means. Mm-hmm. And that's for a period of 5 years. Then when you look at reimbursement, it completely ignores everything we said in A through F and gives different criteria and limits it to 1 year. So I'm wondering what happens to those A through F criteria for the length of the contract, and what happens after year 1 of the contract. It's a question. And I don't actually expect an answer now.
Well, I can't, it's a little hard for me to analyze right here, but I can say that we chose to do a year because we felt that the best way to not, again, to create a stumbling block for people to sign it, that, look, try to maintain this for a year, and we'll do yearly inspections after that for 5 years and try to help you along. But the first year is the most critical time for the trees. A lot of times, after the first year, they can, maybe get through it even if they're a little abused or they got some weeds growing around it. But that first year is the most critical. So we felt, without being too onerous on them, that was it. And in reference to what it refers to, I assumed it referred back to 2 and 3, but maybe it doesn't. It says back to 2 in accordance with Section 2.
That's what Section 4 says.
Yeah, it should say Section 3. That's all.
Ah.
Yeah, you identified a typo. So it should say
I'm
Section 3. The difference is the maintenance agreement and then
Got
the
it.
reimbursement clause. And what we tried to do was to make sure people were going to take care of the trees in the first year and had more of an incentive to take care in the first year, because that's a critical time period for the trees. They're agreeing to take care of them for 5 years, but if the tree dies, something happens to the tree or to the equipment after 3 years down the road, and the person took care of it, there's no reimbursement. There's no, there's no hardship for the property owner.
Question answered.
George?
Just a quick follow-up. So, assuming that the tree makes it through the first year and the city continues to do its inspections, what happens if you come back in year 3 and everything looks like crap? Are you going to help them try and...
Well, we
poor
can,
language choice, but
we'll talk to them and try to persuade them, that look, if you want the trees to live and help them out, you got to do a little better maintenance and try to teach them how to do that maintenance. And we could even offer to get somebody out there to weed
just
or
help
something
them out,
once,
yeah.
just to kind of kickstart the thing.
Yeah,
But
okay.
I don't think we'd go much beyond that. The idea is to try to get people to maintain them. They are on private property, and we can't really have teams running all over the city of our landscape crew, trying to do that. But whatever we could do to try to assist, we would definitely do. And that's the idea behind the yearly inspection, just to go back and, check things out and see how it's working and see how people are maintaining.
Great.
All right. George, did you also have some further update on business assistance?
Yeah, I did have further update on that. Not on. It's a business assistance program, and in that business assistance program, the city, being Creeks Division, is supplying clean water tools, I guess you would call them, to local businesses so that they can become Clean Creeks certified businesses. Just for the public, and if you guys don't remember, we have a current program that's the Clean Creeks Certified Business Program, and what that is we have inspectors on the Creeks Division who go out and look at restaurants and automotive businesses, and if they meet certain criteria, they can become certified as Clean Creeks businesses. The idea behind the business assistance program is to help those businesses out to become Clean Creeks certified or to stay certified. And we do that by providing them tools that they otherwise may not want to spend the extra money on, and these tools will either help them to become certified or make it more efficient for them to use the Clean Creeks practices, which is like for restaurants, washing your mats out and collecting the water and pouring it down the sanitary sewer rather than into our storm drain. And so there's a couple of the eligible businesses are restaurants, automotives, and we just added a new business, which is mobile businesses, and that includes pressure washers and then mobile car washers. And so just to give you an idea how the program works, if we have a new business and we're out inspecting, such as an automotive business, and we do the inspection and everything looks good, but they have like a 55-gallon drum that's stored outside, but it doesn't have secondary containment. Well, on our checklist to be certified, you have to have secondary containment. And so in order to get that, it can be quite expensive. It can be $500 to $1,000 to buy a good piece of equipment that provides secondary containment. And so what we do is we'll offer to pay for that particular item, deliver it to the person, they can use it, and then they become certified. So it's basically just an incentive to participate in the program and to keep the creek water clean. Same thing for an existing business that's already certified. If they have some old equipment that's worn out or doesn't work that efficiently, we will provide them also with these tools. And just so everyone knows, it's up to $1,000 of equipment we do provide per business. Currently, we'll just go over kind of how we promoted this program. We sent out 55 letters to all of the existing certified businesses to see if anyone was interested, whether they needed new equipment or anything like that as part of their business to maintain their certification. And we didn't get any response back from that. So restaurants, managers are pretty busy and there's a lot of turnover, so it's not surprising. But we don't think that's going to probably be the best way to do the marketing. We feel that future marketing will be mostly through word of mouth and also when we do enforcement cases. Actually, most of the certifications kind of result from enforcement cases. We get told that somebody's dumping some dirty water. We go out there to educate them, and then we say, hey, we got the certification program. And along with that, now we can offer them the tools to become certified. So we think over time that the program will increase in its participation. People will participate more as we go around and get certified and recertify these businesses. So that'll be the primary area. We have put it on our website. We hope through the televised meetings like this and the updates that people will hear about it and learn about it and participate or tell people that they do. And anything you guys can do, again, just like the Creek Tree program, if you know anybody with one of those businesses, just let them know about the program. And then we are going to be on the City TV program, so there'll be a little marketing there, and that's it. And then, again, I want to just reemphasize, like we did with the Creek Tree program, that this is voluntary. We don't force any of the businesses to become Clean Creek certified, and we don't force them to take free products. And that's it. So if you got any questions on it right now, one more thing is we do have one business that has participated so far, and that's an auto detailing business, and they've got a couple of booms and some storm drain covers. I think a storm drain cover to use when they're actually washing cars to contain the water, and then they vacuum that up and dispose of it in the sanitary sewer. So,
excellent presentation, George. I've got a question to lead off, and I'm sure other people do as well. In terms of the groups in town that you've reached out to, either as a guest speaker or offering to speak, have you talked to Steve Cushman in the Chamber or the Downtown Organization? Have you talked to John Dickman, who writes the Restaurant Man column for the Daily Sound? The Lodging and Restaurant Association, since the merger, we got the TOT, from the visitor serving end, but now a lot of the restaurants and cafes are members there. Have we scheduled a special speaker opportunity at one of their upcoming meetings? And have we discussed with Dr. Ophelia Arriaga, who's the new vice president in charge of adult ed and continuing education at Santa Barbara City College, that we might be willing to do a one-day training session with maybe a $5 or $10 registration, where any of the businesses in any of those three areas, maybe on a Saturday, could come in and you could present, with your team what's available and give them an opportunity to sign up, kind of when they're not in a stressed work thing. And also, have you made written materials available at City College to their hotel and restaurant management school, so that a lot of the people who go through that program end up getting hired and working in South Coast restaurant and food prep areas? And if we get a little note in their training to let them know what's available and what's expected in the city of Santa Barbara, hopefully they would take that knowledge with them as they work their way up the food service ladder.
Yeah, those sound like some good ideas. We haven't done any of those. We did do some training specifically to the mobile washers when we just opened up the program and had a little, I think it was kind of like a job fair, not a job fair, but it was something associated with clean water, and we worked with the county, I think, on that, and so we were able to provide some training and some information on the program there, and I think that's how we did get our first program.
Well, as you remember, the Green Gardener training program through City College in partnership with the Community Environmental Council has taken huge steps not only to get certification and recognition for the graduates, but also to get the word out about the use of water and chemicals in the soil and preventing runoff. And it's possible that we could work with them to do some kind of a similar program to reach out to these other businesses. But I think, Mr. Jordan, did you have a question, I believe?
Oh, just comments again. How about that social media? No, we'll talk about that later.
You want to explain that again?
My daughters are at home just laughing now, going, "Dad, get out of there." So, city business licenses. My experience and my other job is, that frequently the guys in restaurants aren't there, and that's not where they do their business. But I would bet you that if you could, I know city business licenses charge based on, type of operation, some type of formula there. I would think there's some information there you could gather on true ownerships and true contact information for city business licenses to get right at an owner for restaurants.
For the restaurants, yeah.
Yeah.
We do have to have city businesses licenses for the mobile washers.
Okay.
So that's one way that for anybody who
but I think
participates, they have to have a license.
That would be a
but-
database you could chase and maybe get a better response than just sending something to a restaurant's physical location.
Okay.
And then the other one is they all got to have refuse or water bills too. And where are those going? Are those going to a different address than the job site, which I find frequently also? And then following up on the chair's recommendation, I know a guy who knows a guy on the lodging and restaurant group that does a newsletter and also has some contact information, so you might want to talk with me on that later too, and I think there's some opportunity there that we can advertise for you. So, thank you.
All right. Any other questions for George? Roger?
How many restaurants are there in the city, and how many are part of this program?
Well, I know there's 55 participants as part of or that are Clean Creek certified, but that includes automotive, restaurants, and then a few mobile businesses have.
Let me I can answer part of that
I don't
question
know.
from a database standpoint. From the east side of Santa Barbara to the west side of Goleta alone, there's 450 entries of restaurants in the Lodging and Restaurant Association's database. Okay? So a ton is the answer.
I think we have about 30 restaurants in the program right now.
Yeah, that's what I
in the city.
estimate.
I mean, there's 400 on the south coast. We have had some instances where we only count the ones in the program that are in the city. We do have an instance with Rusty's Pizza, for example, who has an operation in Goleta, Santa Barbara. They've got 5 restaurants, I think. All of them, once they figured out how to help clean water, all of them started implementing the BMPs at all of those restaurants. We only count the Santa Barbara restaurant as being a part of the program. And we've had that with not a lot, but a couple of different restaurants that have multiple locations.
The reason I ask is that the answer appears to be there's a lot of room for further work here.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So a picture is worth 1,000 words, and this is really nice. And as a business owner myself, I look at something like this, and it really means something. And the time is the staff time is probably not there, but in addition to enforcement, should there ever be a half day, perhaps the staff could walk around and actually just ask to physically speak with managers and just show them this, say, hey, we want to help you here. And that might actually go a long way too. Granted, that stretches staff resources more, but then again, the bang for the buck might be well worth it. Thanks.
Okay, that's a good idea.
Oh, good. I don't know whether they'd be willing to give you a public agency or sliding nonprofit scale, but given the state of the economy, if you call up the chamber to ask about speaking opportunities or a newsletter article, you might also ask if they could get you a good rate for this program, maybe sharing with a couple of other city programs to take out some booth space at one of the quarterly trade fairs that the chamber has. Given the state of the economy, those have been drawing very, very high attendance, and it would give people a chance who are interested not only to pick up the paperwork, but actually to talk to you and your team and exchange business cards and maybe set up appointments for later, and you'd hit a whole lot of people who are either have new businesses or are looking to connect and thinking about starting businesses, and they'd all be coming through there in a very relaxed, non-regulatory environment.
Right. Thank you.
Any other questions for George? Yeah, thank you very much. Really, really good report.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Benson, I don't see anything.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry. I just had a couple of cleanup items. I forgot to mention this earlier. One is that I wanted to mention I received an email from a staff member at the Environmental Defense Center supporting the Upper Las Positas Creek Restoration and Stormwater Management Project, and also supporting the pilot creek tree planting program. And I forgot to mention that, so I passed out copies to all of you.
Yeah, thank you.
And lastly, when we were discussing the project out at the golf course, I forgot to ask whether there was someone on the committee who would be available on April 14th to speak at the council meeting and represent the committee there. We have rules set up for that. I just wanted to make sure the committee had an opportunity to do
I'm
that.
hoping to be available, and George is the vice chair. Or will you be in town that day?
I think so.
Okay, so
Just let you know I'm going regardless anyhow. I'll just be in public comment, so as a representative. So.
Okay, thank you. And just for the benefit of the public, the time and place of our next regularly scheduled meeting?
I believe our next meeting is April 8th here at this location. 6:20.
Okay, and
630 Garden Street.
I was wondering whether county government or the public had any last communications for the committee. All right, hearing none, is there a motion to adjourn? Is there a second? Second. All right, it's been moved by Mr. Jordan and seconded by Mr. Weber that we adjourn at 7:14. Thank you.
Made me want you, and all the time you knew it.